Hello, everyone. This is Rick, and welcome to Astral Club. This is questions and answers Q&A number 13. Before we get into it, I'd like to announce some new patrons that have joined Astral Club on Patreon. Jacqueline Yanez is an Astral Scout. Joshua is an Astral Master. T. Dukes is also an Astral Master. And real quick, Rod Bland, who is also a newer patron, just had his first out of the body experience. So congrats to you, Rod. Okay, let's get started then. Oh, by the way, real quick, if you're interested in becoming a patron on Patreon, there will be a link in the description, and you get your videos on Tuesday instead of having to wait to Saturday. And also, it's easy to contact me, and I can answer questions quickly and offer helpful hints. Okay, let's get started. Now, the first question comes, well, it's actually kind of a comment, I guess, comes from Astral Return to Spider Planet. You might remember that I returned to this place where I had an early lifetime, probably millions of years ago, as this large, semi-intelligent type, insect type creature that was part of this tribe. And in that lifetime, due to an accident during a trial of manhood, I died and was killed by one of these spider-like creatures. I went back, and this time I found out a little bit more about the place, and it was actually a moon of a large gas giant, which was interesting. Photios commented that scientists are now theorizing that exomoons might actually be ideal places for life that orbit a gas giant. So that was interesting. Next is from Anne On. Now, Anne says she's new, and she'd like some suggestions on books to learn about astral projection. Great time to remind people of these things. My favorite three books are the classic Robert Monroe, Journeys Out of the Body. That's the book that started modern astral projection up. He's the modern father of astral projection. Journeys Out of the Body. D. Scott Rogo wrote Leaving the Body. And that's a great how-to book. He doesn't get into a lot of adventures, experiences. It's really just a how-to book. And then there is The Projection of the Astral Body by Sylvan, Sylvan, Muldoon, Muldoon. And what I like about that book, it was written probably about 100 years ago now, but he writes about real basic astral projections, and the symptoms that he talks about just screams to me that this guy, he had actual astral projections. It doesn't get really fancy, but I think it probably shows people what the average typical astral projections are like. So those three books are still all available in one form or another. You can get them new on Amazon, or you can find them used in various used bookstore sites online. Next up is Creative 777. He said, do people in the astral travel to other planets, or do they get locked into their consensus reality? He's talking about folks, I think, who have passed over. And he wants to know, how many of them really travel around, and how many create their own little astral worlds, possibly that look a lot like where they were comfortable in Earth. I mean, consensus reality is where a bunch of people get together and say, this is going to be our reality, and this is what it's going to look like. I would say that the folks who actually travel into space far from Earth are fairly rare. From my encounters, most souls in the astral are concerned with the astral planes and their development, and also Earth. There are very few that I've ever met who had lifetimes on Earth who were also interested in traveling to other planets, which I find inexplicable. But when you talk to people, and I have done so, they're frightened because traveling many light years from Earth can be a very lonely experience, very isolating experience. So if you don't have the right type of personality, that can be extremely intimidating. So from what I've seen, it's still fairly rare for folks to, even after they passed over, to visit space and other planets. Motoriz ask, what is the lifespan of the astral body? And this has been asked in one form or another by a number of people. Now, these are just approximations. I would say the average is around 100 years. Some can go as long as 200 years. For example, people who report seeing spirits wandering about here on the physical plane, where they pretty much end up interacting in some way, shape, or form, they generally appear to be entities that have had lifetimes within the last couple hundred years. Very few times do people report interaction with much older spirits. And when they do, that much older spirit is going through some sort of motion. It's like, oh yes, the lady of the castle. She died tragically 500 years ago, and sometimes on cold, windy, blustery, rainy nights, she can be seen wandering through the hall holding a candle. Yes, and she's completely oblivious to you and everyone else. Why? Because it's just an astral shell. The intelligence has moved on. Essentially, what you've got here is a corpse, much like a physical corpse, when the life form has actually left. Now, in the case of the astral, this astral corpse can still have some sort of mobility. It can still go through repetitive actions that perhaps were the types of things that it did when it had life. But there's no intelligence there. And you won't see it turning to you and winking or saying hi because it's a corpse. It's just going through these motions. And generally, you'll see that it's becoming more and more indistinct. When people report these very old spirits, they're generally very blurry. That's because, just like a physical corpse, it's decaying. So you get less and less and less detail. And once again, real quickly, and I don't claim to be an expert on this subject, just from my experience, typically after you pass from the physical into the astral, you've got a number of choices. You pick somewhere in the astral where you can go over your lessons, where you can learn more, perhaps consult with others, consult with a guide, for instance. If you're developed enough, you may choose to go to the mental plane, in which case you discard your astral and then live on the mental plane for a period of time. You can choose to become a guide if you are qualified. You can certainly choose to reincarnate back to physical Earth school during some time period. And kind of related to a prior question, there are extremely rare cases where beings choose to incarnate on alien planets. Those are very rare, but it does happen, I've heard. Okay, the next video we'll discuss here is Astral Guide School number 1. And if you recall, this was the first episode where I was summoned to a school with 11 other students and an astral teacher. And his job is evidently to train us to become guides. In this one, forgiveness seemed to be the main topic. There was this German soldier who had created quite a bit of havoc while he was alive and caused a lot of suffering. And he was going through a process whereby he was living through all these different lifetimes, especially the ending parts, so that he could understand what it was like to go through this type of suffering. And it was all about forgiveness. Now, Creative 777 again said that he's heard that we all choose what we want to experience in life. Is it really so, or are only souls at higher development? Are they the only ones who can choose to live a certain life with certain parents in certain areas? I'll give you my benefit of the experience that I've gained. I don't claim to have a monopoly of this information because this is a question that's been debated for thousands of years, and it's a very involved question, even though it sounds rather simple. Now, are there people who choose their lives and their parents? Yes, there are. Keep in mind that on some level, those parents also have to agree. There has to be some sort of bond there. If there's not, it usually ends in a very odd family dynamic. That does happen, but it usually ends in a family that has virtually no connection with one another, and it seems very odd. But there are certainly people who can and do choose that. Now, there are times when people end up in situations that are less than ideal because on the astral, they made a decision or they were counseled to help make a decision that they needed to experience X, Y, and Z, and that it might be unpleasant, but it was an experience that would help them grow. Now, I know when you're in the physical and you're in an awful situation, that seems completely unbelievable. But understand that when you're in the astral, things start becoming very theoretical again. It's amazing how quickly you can forget the trials and tribulations of what it's like to live here in the physical. Just the short times that I spend on the astral, it's really easy to kind of forget how tough Earth school can be. So sometimes I think it's a lot easier to theorize that, yes, I realize I need to experience this particular thing, so I'm going to incarnate with this guy I've had a problem with before in the past, and he's going to be my father, and we're probably going to have some problems, but hopefully I can learn something. So even though that seems unbelievable, it happens, I think, because in the astral, you're much more divorced from the emotions of it that we are immersed in here on the physical. And it's just like in the physical, when you go to school, you've got subjects that you love, and you're so happy you got this teacher. And you're so happy you love this subject. And then other times you're in classes where you're bored or you hate the teacher and the teacher hates you. And it's just an awful, awful experience. Yet it's part of your schooling and you have to go through it. So that's really my best, answer to that type of question. Keep in mind, don't consider this the end all be all. That's just my interpretation of what I have heard and experienced, and there are others who have other input and other opinions. Now, some folks said that they wanted to know why I was chosen to be part of this astral guide school. Nicolor and Timo thought it was most likely because, I can share my experiences with you here on Astral Club. Photios asked a similar question, and I would say I have to agree. I don't see any particular reason why I should be selected on any kind of spiritual development basis. I think it's fairly plain that there must be millions of people on Earth who are infinitely more qualified from a spiritual standpoint than I am. But the talent that I have It's twofold. Number one, I can astral project so that I'm available. Number two, I've got this particular channel so that I can share it with others. So I would say that's most likely my primary qualification and why I was selected to go to this astral guide school. Jacob Isbell asked, did the German officer freely choose to experience those ending experiences of his victims? Was this a free choice of his, or perhaps implicitly he's asking, did someone force him to do this? The teacher said, and from everything that I was able to observe, this German soldier did choose to go through these experiences. No one forced him to do this. It's kind of like, and this is a bad example, but you could choose to go to college and go through all those trials and tribulations because hopefully you'll gain some knowledge on the way. Generally, no one's going to force you to go to college. That's something that you have to want to do. This guy was confronted by the enormity of his crimes. And in the astral, all of that physical crap fell away. And he was able, all the illusions and delusions fall away. And he was able to see, just how awful and how severely he departed from his life's goal and the harm that he caused. And he was confronted with the fact that the way to learn from this experience and to try to atone is to go through these ending experiences. And he did so of his own free will. No one forced him to do that. And indeed, what would be the point? Because if you forced him to do that at astral gunpoint, let's say, you'd be committing the same type of crimes that he committed. Forcing others to endure experiences that were unpleasant. What's the point of that? It's just like when we talk about hell, eternal damnation, eternal suffering. What's the point? What does that accomplish if there's no endpoint whereby a lesson is learned and people can move on? What's the point? What would he learn? And even if the people he harmed could somehow feel better about his suffering, is that really the best way to go about improving the human species? We've all committed errors. We've all committed crimes against one another. Obviously not as severe as his were. But, imagine if it was nothing but a series of having to go through suffering. Every single one of us being forced to suffer. It just wouldn't make any sense. And I think this way, his soul was certainly blasted. I'll give you that. But I can be relatively sure that it's the mistakes that he made in the past would not be repeated. That those lessons were indeed learned. And they were learned the hard way. And perhaps that's the best way to learn lessons because you don't forget them easily. Next up, enlightenment. Ask a question for the ages. He said, how can I forgive myself and others? This is a powerful question that really should be asked of a sage like Buddha or perhaps the Jesus of the Bible. I'm just a guy who leaves his body and talks about it. However, I'll give it, a try. I see it that we all make mistakes and we all act in ways that injure others, whether we do it on purpose or whether we do it just through thoughtlessness. If we wish to be forgiven by those we've hurt and wronged, it's only fair that we must be willing in turn to forgive those who've done harm to us. In these situations, we typically assume, of course, that the offending party is truly sorry for their offense and wishes to make amends, as required to repair the damage done. Now, I'm not a Christian anymore, but I am familiar with the Bible, and Jesus went much further than that, and he counseled us to love those that hate us. Now, that situation requires a much more profound state of forgiveness, and that's pretty darn hard to achieve. And I can tell you, I'm not there yet. But that's probably my best answer to this type of question. And if you want a better answer, I suggest you go to somebody a lot more qualified in that department than myself. Andy Marzano wanted to know, can you control your thoughts in the astral? He said that in the physical, if he's got somebody who's boring him or annoying him, he says he's pretty good at hiding it on his face so that they can't see. Now, when you travel in the astral, new people spill thoughts out all over the place. It's kind of like a baby with a leaky diaper. Their thoughts they're just broadcasting them all over the place. Now, once you're experienced in astral projection or you've been on the astral plane, for a period of time, you learn to discipline your thoughts and only to communicate with others what you want to communicate. And when you do communicate, you use telepathy, and even that word is a limited word because you're not just communicating thoughts when you communicate, you are actually communicating emotions, and in a very real sense, the person you're communicating to understands what it was like for you to go through a particular experience because in a certain way they get to go through it themselves. So, but typically, if you're a newbie on the astral plane, your thoughts are spilling out all over the place. So, learning to control them is something that you have to master. Now, if you think about it in the physical, when you're a kid, how often do kids say stupid things because they haven't learned yet to control their thought process? And so you have them in a store somewhere and they'll be like, that lady's ugly or something stupid like that. And the mother will be like, shush, shush, shush. Just like in the physical, you have to, master that process. One other thing I want to talk about, though, real quickly is emotions. Now, people have reported, and it is true, that when you're astral projecting, sometimes they feel very emotional. And I think we've learned in the physical to suppress our emotions. At least many people have. But when you're in the astral, until you master that experience again, your emotions can overcome you. If you're sad here in the physical, you can become overwhelmingly sad in the astral. If you're happy here, you can be overjoyed in the astral. It's a process whereby you have to relearn how to control your emotional state as well as how to avoid just communicating like a loudspeaker with everyone. It's important. I wanted to talk about emotions because remember, any kind of strong emotion felt on the astral, the physical body learns about it through the astral cord, and it interprets dangers to itself widely. So you'll end up being pulled back. It's also why I counsel people, if you're feeling a little depressed in the physical, do not astral project. Because on the astral, you will feel profoundly depressed. The worst depression you've ever felt. So just understand how that works as far as thought control and as far as emotions are concerned on the astral. Now, Roddy Rich asks Rick, you are a master at astral projection. Do you think you are as good and experienced as Robert Monroe, of course, the author of Journeys Out of the Body? I want to be perfectly clear on this answer. Bob Monroe is the modern father of astral projection. I'm just happy to be a shadow in his reflected light. Period. That's all I got to say about that. Okay, next up. And this involves various and sundry old wives' tales and a variety of myths that I hear on a regular basis. This particular one was, And this was by Game Ticket. And by the way, I hear these things all the time. And just Game Ticket happened to come up with this particular one he heard. He said that I heard that if someone touches your physical body while you're astral projecting, you die. And as I said, there's a wide variety of these things. There's like, well, what happens if you die in the astral? Does your physical body die? It always surrounds with how dangerous is astral projecting. And I can tell you that if you ever watched Mythbusters, I used to love that program, where they'd examine myths and then they determine whether they were real or whether they were busted. Well, this myth is busted, okay? Astral projecting is perfectly safe. If someone touches your physical body, it's bad because all it's going to happen is your physical body's going to say, uh-oh, and it's going to call back your astral body. Because once again, remember, your physical body is hyper alert. It's hyper alert for any possible dangers. Even if it's just your significant other rolling over or even touching you, it's going to say, uh-oh, possible danger, and pull you back. So the only danger you got to worry about is a shortened astral projection. You're not going to die, so that myth is busted. Skywalker asked, is there any way we could extend an astral projection into the past, like it's possible into the future? And we've seen how I can astral project into the future at times, and in these various futures, I can spend varying periods of time there, anywhere from minutes and days and months to even years. And he wants to know, wow, can I do this in the past too? I wish. However, it seems to work in reverse. The further we go back in the past, not only can't we change anything, but our time spent there is very short. So I'm sorry. If you want to hang out for dinosaurs for years, good luck. It's not going to work. So thank you for that. And now we have the astral journey to a future space base. If you recall, someone asked me, "Hey Rick, could you come up with a possible positive future that you can see?" And I searched about, and I found a future where Earth had a base on a planet in another solar system. So I went there, and I actually ended up occupying a future body of mine. So I actually had a physical body. And the only reason this was possible is because it was my future self. So the code, the astral energy code, was similar. Now, keep in mind that the clock was ticking, because as I was there and a couple of minutes started going by, I could feel this irritating electrical energy building that was unpleasant. So even though my code was very close, it wasn't exact. And and there's a reason why. It's to avoid this typical possession kind of stuff. So but anyway, I was able to occupy that, and I was able to meet my future, well, my daughter now. Well, that's a possible incarnation for her. And so she was there, and she was this homeless child. They called them base rats. And so I popped up and had a number of minutes in that particular experience. Now, Armin Singh said that, imagine if you told your future self to look for this YouTube channel, Astral Club. Then he could find this video talking about what happened to him. And then I said, wow, now you give me that idea. And Andrew Ponte said, I feel like that has some sort of paradox implications, but my brain is too small to even contemplate something like this. And I got to be honest, Andrew, my brain hurts too, just kind of thinking about this kind of stuff. Whenever you get into time travel and, wow, you can get into all kinds of bizarre situations. So, but it was certainly an interesting idea. But keep in mind, I think we're also making assumptions here. It's amazing. We assume that we will always have these things. Now, imagine there's this base. It must be at least hundreds of years into the future. What makes you think that YouTube is still going to be around years from now? I mean, I remember when people used to love MySpace. When's the last time you went on MySpace? And think about, computer programs and social media. They seem to live hard and die fast. So will the tube be around hundreds of years from now even? Who knows? But if I was a betting man, I would probably say it's a long, long memory. You'd probably be lucky if it was stored in some ancient repository of knowledge somewhere. Deontay Ware said, I did it. Thanks, Rick. I astral projected. I was going to jump out the window, but I started looking at my hands, and then I got pulled back into my body. And that's always, you got to try. Everybody said get away as quickly as possible. But anyway, he wanted to know, do you think the government has agencies to prevent people from astral projecting? My answer is no. I don't think the government cares about people astral projecting. However, I have encountered various electronic or electromagnetic countermeasures as well as astral secret service people in front of in front of the Oval Office at the White House, and I've encountered a secret military base where I was trapped for a period of time in an electromagnetic countermeasure. So I don't think they care about you astral projecting as long as you stay away from their secrets. Photios and Skywalker and a number of others were disappointed by the economic flaws of the future base, because my daughter in that future body was this homeless child, this base rat. And I got to tell you, my daughter in this lifetime was none too pleased about that possible future. But I told her, I said, look, a lot of folks have rough childhoods. That doesn't mean they can't turn into amazing adults. At any rate, keep in mind that perhaps these social flaws that we see, this was a private base. This wasn't a government base. This was owned by a corporation. I got that signal very strong. I don't recognize the name of the corporation, but it was definitely a private conglomerate of companies. And I was there in that future body as some sort of a psychologist and counselor for people based there. So my answer to that is, just because the United States has certain social programs, a safety net, doesn't mean that an Exxon mining or an Exxon drilling location or a platform has them. Just because the UK has various social programs doesn't mean necessarily that British Petroleum does. So that's my answer to that. And keep in mind, maybe this was a frontier, in times when mankind spreads out and we have these frontiers. Generally, even though in civilization we've got all these wonderful programs and supports, generally on the frontier things get a little rough. So who knows? Alexei Konovalek wanted to know, what can be done to help loved ones who've passed on? Now, this is a great question. This is a question that perhaps all of us in one form or another have thought about or might be interested in. First of all, if you can astral project, great. I mean, it's a great way to say goodbye to someone, or if you've got any lingering issues, that's a great time to do it. The first 30 days after someone passes is the best time to astral project and to contact them. After that, they can end up in various areas of the astral plane, for instance, that you may not be able to get to. If they had a long, lingering illness, though, many times they'll be in recuperative areas of the astral, kind of like in intensive care. Here on the physical, You can't just walk into an intensive care to say hi to someone. It's restricted. It works the same way in the astral. But assuming they didn't pass over after some long, draining illness, many times in the first 30 days or so, they're still in a saying goodbye phase. So that's the best time. Okay, but what if you can't astral project yet? I would say if you need to offer forgiveness to them, now's the time to do that. If you have love for them, now's the time to pass that love on into the ethers and let them know that they are loved. And then let them go. Keep in mind that there's nothing more unhealthy for both parties involved than for someone who's passed over to have someone in the physical plane try to keep them trapped there. Okay, if they've passed over, they need to move on to their next development time. Trying to keep them there is like trying to keep someone, in kindergarten when they're 5 years old. You're trying to force them to stay there. I mean, look, they're ready to move on. It can be, even though maybe they enjoyed kindergarten, but if they're ready to move on, if you try to keep them there, all it's going to do is it's going to end up torturing them and torturing you, because you're going to be trapped and you're going to ignore the physical world that you're currently in and you need to operate within, and you're going to trap them here. They'll be in this nether world. Okay, neither in the astral or the physical. It's not good. So that would be my advice: is forgive, love, and then let them go. We're almost done. The Curse of Ymir said, do you know how you could be incarnated in this lifetime and in this possible future, even though it's many years from now? He's talking about, how could I have a body many hundreds of years from now? Well, keep in mind that time seems like this big barrier here in the physical, but in the astral, it's really just an illusion. You realize it is. There are people who pass on tomorrow, and they'll end up incarnating back in the Edo area in Japan, or China 1,000 years ago, or Europe or the UK 100 years ago. Time is not a limitation, and the future is also on the table. If I can visit there and occupy a body, even temporarily, then they can certainly do so. So it's don't get caught up in the illusion of time, because that's all it is an illusion. Okay, plectrum dust, and this is our last one here. Amazing how your future incarnation met your present daughter who was in another body. That can't be just a coincidence, right? And my answer is most definitely it wasn't a coincidence. Reincarnation, in my experience, quite often works like a school class. You move from year to year to year with a group of people. It's the same people, but it becomes different classes and different lessons as you move on. Now, in reincarnation, you may change. You may be someone's daughter one time and their mother another. If there's a bond of love, souls become tied together in the best possible way. And it's quite often that you will see them again in another form, and they will never, ever really be gone, because they'll always be connected with you. As long as that bond of love is there, they will always be connected with you. And don't be surprised if you don't see them again in some other form. Okay, well, that is all we've got for this week. I'd like you to if you like this video, share it with those of like mind, subscribe if you haven't already, and please continue to leave those comments and questions. They may pop up in a future Q&A. And as always, I'm Rick, and I will see you on the astral plane.